I thought maybe we could start by just perhaps like sharing any particular favorite episodes that you had. Anything that really spoke to you right away. Who had a favorite episode? You remember that far back with so many episodes?
I like the one, man, I don't know any details. I just remember really liking the one where they talked about the Native American community in some state in the north.
Minnesota?
Yeah. Mankato area.
Yeah, that's what
Charlotte
it was.
liked that one. You shared how you enjoyed that one, right?
I enjoyed that one because I lived in the Mankato area for about 6 months, and I was there at Christmas, and I saw the parade down the side of the highway the day after Christmas, and I had no idea what was going on, and now I do.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that one for some reason, just like the interviews they did or something, but now I can't even say anything intelligent because I can't remember exactly. I just remember liking that one.
Yeah, I remember when Charlotte and I were discussing this, I remember sharing that for me, that was one of the ones that was not as compelling just because it was hi Chris, it was so localized in an area that I had no connection to. And so, you know, the big takeaway for me from that episode was, what stories do I not know about from my very local area? Because, you know, he's talking about like, he's from this area, like this is his home, and he grew up there and he went to public school there, and he did not learn about these very shaping influences for his state and for his area. He just had no idea. And then he said that you uncover this whole story, and I was like, that's interesting. I don't super connect to it other than the fact that I'm like, what is in our history here that I have no idea about? You know, it's one of those interesting things, especially with, you know, every time Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, as we should really be calling it, you know, comes around, people are like, let's time to look at whose land are we on and what debt do we owe. That, like, even just the simple act of like acknowledging like whose land is this by name, because a lot of us can't be like, who used to live there. We could be like, well, you know, it's this kind of nebulous idea of some indigenous people, some Native Americans. I'm like, there were very specific nations that had names, that had stories that we just don't know in order to pay any sort of tribute or acknowledgement of that. You know, there's my little thing about about that episode, but I thought that was a really interesting one. Do you have anything else you want to add, Amanda?
I think it was interesting to me because I'm from New Mexico, and there's a lot of that Native American history everywhere. Like the art's everywhere, the houses are Pueblo, like, so I see that a lot, but I still think like, but yeah, like you said, like, what do you not know about where you grew up? And it made me think the same thing. Like, I grew up right in the middle of it. Like there are powwows all over me, or not all over me, all over the place. Like there were like such good cultural things that I just had no clue or didn't care about. And I wish that I had cared more, you know, or like had been more aware. And so now I'm like, okay, how do I, you know, do that here? Or when we go back, make sure we like learn about that with my kids and stuff like that. And just be like, this is why this town is called that. This is what it means. This is the people who lived here or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's cool here how they have, here in Arkansas, they have this, we have a local museum of Native American history, which is really cool. And I feel like that's been our only connection to the past people of this land, is they sometimes do stuff. And so we can kind of take advantage of that, like go to the museum or go to one of their events, and then it's like we can have that connection, but there's probably a lot more they could be doing around that area.
Yeah.
Especially get that coming up into like Thanksgiving time. It's always a good time. I'm like, it's always a good time to remind ourselves of our history here. Cami, did you have any favorite episodes?
Oh, I think my favorite was the one called I've got my notes over here. Let me
Yeah.
let me pull it up. Okay, so part 6 was called That's Not Us, So We're Clean. And it talked about the differences between like Southerners and Northerners and how lots of times people from the North think like, oh, racism is removed. It's so far away. That's something that people in the
Right.
South deal with. But it's not. Like, everybody in this country is growing up feel like getting these messages that are racist, and like just because I'm not from the South, like I still have a lot that I'm responsible for, and like I shouldn't be proud of being removed from certain things because lots of it is privilege. Like I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I remember that one being really, really good. Here, I was trying to look up as well. I was like, oh, do they have some good notes on that one? What was? Yeah, That's Not Us, So We're Clean.
Mm-hmm. But just trying to be more self-aware and saying like, this is a me problem, and it's a lot easier to focus on how other people
Yeah.
have handled things or are currently dealing with things. But
Yeah, I thought what was interesting about that episode is it talked a lot about like the actual like history that makes the North super racist.
mm-hmm.
So it's easy to be a pinpoint, like we kind of, especially if you live in the North, or I guess technically we live in the South, Arkansas, but like it just, I think, you know, in terms of roots, you know, we have this kind of stereotype of this not very well educated Southern person who's just super racist. And, you know, we have this whole history of, well, they were on the wrong side of the Civil War, so they have Confederate flags. And so we're really well versed in what is it that they do that is racist.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of documented how, like, you know, it talked about like some of like the northern cities are like some of the most segregated cities.
Mm-hmm.
Like literal facts. This isn't just like a feeling of like who feels more racist or who it's actual like real in tangible ways. If, you know, if we associate with the North of being that, it's like, oh, we should have some responsibility for that, because if we're saying we don't have responsibility because we're not from the South, then we need to take responsibility for these actual things that that were part of that, which is really interesting. Charlotte, do you feel comfortable talking with your dental stuff? She's like, not going to share it now. Okay, Catherine, did you have a favorite that you listened to so far?
Yes, so there's a couple I really liked. I think I've been reading lots and lots of like history based on like Black stuff recently, and so I really enjoyed those, but I really especially did like the native indigenous peoples one, where it just talks about, so I think you already talked a little bit about that one when I had to hop off, but
yeah, no, go ahead.
That one, I mean, you know a lot of the stuff, right? But it's just, I don't know, it was really sad, but really good for me to think about that more specifically as well right now. Just kind of like broadening my horizons on things to like keeping my eye out for, and like thinking what I can do. I also just was listening to the affirmative action one today. And that one, I like wish I had that one at my fingertips like a couple of months ago when I was just talking to a friend, and we were just talking about stuff, you know, this type of thing, and she's just like, but seriously though, now it's like the white guys who are being like stiffed out of jobs. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, I like heard about this mine one time where they like wouldn't let any of the guys get to be more like any more manager positions, and so it's like they only had it open for like or the women and the black people, and I'm just like,
I mean,
one.
although Hamilton was super oppressive to people because it did not let white people in, except for a few, but
Yeah, exactly. There's a good point. Reverse racism at its finest.
yeah.
So it's just like, I don't know. Just when you have that one guy, so there's the two people who listened to the lecture and they got such different things out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I feel like this is the conversations that like, I don't know, we have on the regular.
Yeah.
It's definitely not saying like, I've definitely fallen into some of those lines of thinking for sure.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know. It's just so crazy to me, I think, that people now think it's like reverse racism and
Yeah. Well, it opened with some statistics on that. I can't remember exactly what they was, but I have actually, you know, a lot of them, the Pew Research Center, I don't know if that's the same statistics they use, but the Pew Research Center has them about like, what do people feel like, who is the most oppressed? And that's a really well regarded group that does social studies, but you know, they talk about like how many white people feel like oppression towards white people is the biggest, like that's the most biggest problem we have right now, and it's close to half for all white people. And it's, if you put it in like people who are Republican, for example, they broke it down by this, it's solidly more than half.
Yeesh.
Yeah, and that's like, for me, it's this you know, I do feel like that was one of my favorite episodes because it laid out this case of, this is all the affirmative action that white people have benefited from before this, when this country, before it was even formed. And these are all the things, and I mean, it was an undeniable case.
and also I even liked the ones that are like, and you are benefiting from right now, like, remember this, like, here's your affirmative action.
Yeah, it's like this cumulative effect, and it's so interesting that as a whole, our country is so detached from facts, the facts of the case. And I think that Chenjerai had a really good kind of, you know, he talked about this this quote. He had so many good quotes. I felt like I just like copied and pasted a bunch from the transcript because I was like, oh, when he said this, it was so good. I'm just gonna find the right one. But it's like this idea of, so Catherine, you were talking about the two people who had gone through this training required by their workplace on racism and diversity, and they, you know, the woman in charge of this, who was on the podcast, talked about all these, you know, this affirmative action, all these things that had benefited and still continue to benefit white people, and just made this incredible case for it. And you know, one of them was she's really struggling with it, like she had been processing it. I'm just like, I don't know how to fit this into my worldview. Like, she's really struggling and it's really difficult. And he's like, I empathize with that. Like, it's hard to have something new kind of come and shake your foundation of what you used to think, and have to like rethink all of that. And so he's like, he gets that, but then he says, like, my empathy has a limit because so many of us have already been living in that world for such a long time. And I think about like the privilege it takes to be at just whatever age she's at, and just coming to grips with the actual reality, and not some kind of made up fantasy.
I like, oh, that was me. Like, I don't know if anyone else felt
right, like
oh,
us right here.
Mm-hmm.
Like sitting here in our comfortable little white people circle, like learning about all of this stuff, and knowing that however many years we've been on this earth, we didn't know this stuff.
even down to like the emotion, like you can tell she's very emotional. She's like,
Yeah.
I think to the point of tears, and I feel like I've been like that multiple times, but it's almost not fair. I mean, it's fine for us to process that and things. But yeah, just having like, oh, really, this year is changed my worldview like that, and I'm still processing like that. And I think it's good to have this group to do that with. We're not putting that like emotional burden on the people who are like, yeah, no.
This just reminds me of that chapter in White Fragility where it talks about like weaponized white tears.
Mm-hmm.
Like all our emotions around it get in the way, and then just people are just like sitting there just like, okay guys, like you just need to deal with this on your own time. Like I get it's hard, but Charlotte, I see your messages coming in and I'm gonna read them so we can discuss them real quick. Yeah, and just how like Chenjerai talks about how much was needed to bring her to this point of grappling with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like she came and did hours of this training, and to come to a point where it was so she could have a factual understanding of what had actually happened. And like how much that is buried and disguised and just pushed down in our culture, that we have to spend so much time and effort actually going out and finding what really happened and what really the impact was. And as he said, like the other guy went through the same training and was completely still unmoved.
Yeah.
And what kind of willful, this idea of just like this willful, like this case is being made and you really, really can't argue with it. It's not like he argued with the substance when he talked about it. It was not that he was like, this didn't actually happen. It was that he came out with this idea of like, this kind of happened, but he uses his deflecting techniques of like, well, but it maybe wasn't as, but racism goes all ways, and some Black people are racist towards each other, and sometimes they're racist towards Asians. So
he's like, and how about this thing that happened to me one time with my business? That's
Mm-hmm.
like, he's too focused on like the unfairness to him. And it's like, it's not like denying that was probably a tough time for him. Like, I think his business failed or something, right? And he's like, I could have had more of that funding or something, but it wasn't available to me. But I'm just like, but there's like a bunch, I don't know, like, I don't think any of this racism
but there's an undeniable historical trajectory.
Right. It's not, none of it is saying, sure, that one thing was probably hard for you, right? But like, overall, in the scheme of things, like, this is not even comparable.
Well, I think the idea that, and I see this a lot, is just like helping someone else does not take away from what you have. And when people get in that mindset of they have to give something up, it's scary. And it's like I want to protect, I'm going to be defensive. Instead of thinking, look, you have every right to have these things to help you out because life has been, or history has been unfair to you for whatever reason, and still being accountable for your own stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, just that idea. And I'm really curious what makes us as humans kind of get defensive and feel like, no, don't take my stuff, when it's like, no, I'm not taking any of your stuff. I'm just asking you to like scoot over, you know? I think we've talked about that kind of idea before, but that's what I thought of when he was talking. Like, he went into instant defensiveness instead of like the other girl who was just like processing it, like, this is really hard to hear. I don't like this feeling, but you kind of have the idea that she'll kind of think through it and she'll do more research and, you know, whatever. Right. He was kind of moved to action, whereas he was just instantly shut down.
I think what another thing, I really agree with all of that defensiveness and stuff. And I think what maybe he didn't come away acknowledging or learning from that, which is what I was really learning from that episode, and also like was really helpful for me to think how I could talk about this in the future, was he maybe didn't get that one grant, but just the fact of having a white name and stuff probably meant he was able to get a loan in the first place, and he was in a neighborhood where he could start a business, you know. And there's all these things which beforehand, just the very basis of society, even
Yeah.
now, and he had an education or something in which taught him how to do those things. Like
Yeah.
I don't know his circumstance, but just in general, like we
Yeah.
start at such a higher base level from all our affirmative action basically stuff. So
Yeah.
I think that's what he like didn't like grasp from that, and that's maybe what struck me most from that episode is like, oh yeah, we have a ton of
Yeah.
affirmative.
Well, it's kind of like, it's like everybody's situation is entirely unique and nobody is ever saying that it's not. But there is
And we all-
something about whiteness, and there's something about being black, and there's something about that impacts a lot of things. And I think that cannot be, and you know, even like so Chenjerai talked about that. He's like, me as a black man, like I can see how my privilege was built on the exploitation of other people, like because you know, he has, you know, specific circumstances or whatever. I can't remember exactly what his were, but you know, like we all have that in our history, and it shouldn't be that hard for somebody who is white and has a very obvious history of it to just be like, look, like my wealth came from, you know, maybe you know, just the things that my parents gave me that they were able to get because black people couldn't have a job or an education, so they got it automatically and that's been passed down to me, and it's a thing, you know. I do think it's interesting though, and just going back to what you said real quick, about how we're not being asked to give anything up. And I wanted to maybe look at that because I feel like maybe towards the end, when they're talking about, you know, they talked about that guy. Sorry, we're picking on this poor guy in the podcast, but about a lot of his discomfort was not being willing to be uncomfortable for one thing, but also not wanting to kind of, it's like you can kind of like, is this whiteness thing of being able to tell that something is, if I look at that too closely, it might require me to give up something, as in I might have to give up my advantage. And I think they talked about that in the transformation episode of yeah, I guess maybe that's something for us to discuss. Like, does it require us to not, yeah, like Charlotte saying here, like, does it really require us to not give anything up, or what would we have to give up to make change?
Yeah, I was thinking more like assets.
Right.
But yeah, not obviously you give up your comfort, you give up
Yeah.
your pride, you give up your history a little bit, or what you think was right, you know.
Yeah. Your sense of like moral superiority in some ways, like that's, or like cultural superiority. Like I feel like that's maybe some of the whiteness we built up of like this Americanness of like American exceptionalism. It's like that would have to go. What would that cost us to be like, we are a country? Sorry, I was just literally watching. Has anybody watched Designated Survivor?
I watched part of it.
Yeah. But anyway, it just, you know, interesting show, but they're just talking normal politics, but they were talking, the president got into on this TV show, got into a accidental photo op with a guy from Saudi Arabia, and then his person who he thought was his daughter, but it was actually his underage 14-year-old wife. And so it was kind of like a thing. And so he heads out and condemns it, and you know, all these kind of things like that's not okay. And the ambassador for that country was just like, you're sitting here judging our country for our lack of morals. And she starts listing off, you know, all the classic things of like, your country was built on slavery, and you know, the genocide of the native population. He's like, yes, like that's a fair point, like all those fair points. And she's like, and you literally have legal child marriage also in your country, like right now. And I was like, that's actually really true. It is, because like technically the legal marriage age is 17 or 18, but there is a whole lot of exceptions. And there are dozens of girls who are being legally married at the age of 10 or 12 in our country right now. Like, that's happening. And we sit here and we think, but you know, like, oh, these morals, and we're better than the other countries who do these kind of things. You know, I'm like, we literally have child marriage. Like, you can't really get much worse in terms of like things a country does that you're like, we should judge that country because they have human rights violations. You know, sorry, it was a TV show, so that was really not, but it's also real. So
Yeah, I think when you're busy judging other people because you've been told, oh, we're the best, we're the best, we're the best,
yeah,
you miss a lot of things that can change and be
Yeah.
better in your own country.
I think there's also a lot of focus on winning, like especially in like America, of like capitalism,
most gold medals,
most
yes,
like things.
capitalism. That's a good point.
Where it's like we're happy, we want to win, and we are, as long as you're the best, we're fine with that. And like on the individual level too,
Yeah.
you have cases where like they've done, I don't know if it's in this podcast or somewhere else, but where they talk about like if they offer somebody, if I'm going to give you $20,000, but I'm going to give all of your friends $50,000, or I'm going to give you $10,000 and none of your friends get anything, people would rather have the $10,000 because they're ahead of their friends, right? And I think that's that same type of thing with like feeling comfortable or reparations or like any of those types of things, is like we don't want other people to get things unless we get our fair share, and we got the most of it.
Yeah.
Like we won that situation.
And like that combined with the lack of acknowledgement about how we got the $50,000 instead of the $20,000, like that's a really dangerous thing. Like he gave this metaphor about the ladder. Like we get to this top of this ladder and then we kick it down and we're like, why aren't you guys doing good things, with no acknowledgement that we literally climbed up the ladder? And we're like, what ladder? No ladder. We don't know anything about a ladder. What's wrong with these people? They can't get up the ladder. I did it.
And we think it's because we work so hard. Like,
Yeah.
I've worked really hard to get where I'm at, but like it's just ignoring all the advantages that we've been
Yeah.
given.
So let's personalize this for a second. So in terms of like what we would have to give up, like what do you think you personally have to give? Like what personally has to go in order to make this better? Any like what kind of personally?
I think one thing that came to mind is like time and energy.
Yeah.
Like to do the research, listen to the people who have gone through this, change your mindset, like time and energy to do that it is kind of exhausting. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm like most things that are of worth take time and energy. And so that's one thing, is like it's easy to be like, oh, I'm too busy, or I'm doing all these other good things or whatever, but this is something that's like really really important to like our core as a nation, I think. And I think everyone needs to spend the time and energy to do that. And that's something I struggle with too, is just like, oh, I wanted to read these other books, or whatever. And it's
No
like, it's
fun for
reading a
you,
freaking
Amanda.
book.
No
And it's
fun.
like, I'm not doing that much, but it's something, and I'm trying. That's how you change your
Yeah.
mindset and stuff, is gain knowledge, and it takes time and effort. And so that's one thing.
Yeah. Charlotte's posting a thing. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I could read it out.
Yeah.
She said she was recently reading A Room of Her Own, which talks a lot about sexism and misogyny. But I think this quote also applies to racism, what we give up. Possibly when the professor insisted a little too emphatically upon the inferiority of women, he was concerned not with their inferiority, but with his own superiority. That was what he was protecting, rather hot-headedly, and with too much emphasis, because it was a jewel to him at the rarest price. It was not merely the cry of a wounded vanity, it was a protest against some infringement of his power to believe in himself. Yeah.
Good quote.
It's like that idea of like superiority. Like we don't want to acknowledge it because as a good person, we don't want to acknowledge that this history puts us in this superior position, because then would be compelled to do something about it. And that's probably what that guy is doing. Like, if I look at this too closely and don't just kind of like sidestep it, it would compel me to do something about it, and I don't want to have to give up that. So I think like time definitely is a thing. Honestly, like I know we did a challenge on this a while back, like of just like a money challenge. Like, as simple as it is, like buying black, like changing the way we spend our money does have an impact. You know, and again, like it doesn't even like feel that hard to just like, okay, now I'm directing it to black owned banks instead of just, you know, white owned banks. It's a small change. It doesn't actually really like impact you that much, but you have to do these things. I remember reading, I don't know if C.S. Lewis is appropriate in this context, but about, you know, he has a quote about like Christianity, and Christians should be giving, you know, past the point where it's uncomfortable. I can't remember exactly what his wording was, but I always remember that like it should be in some ways like you are wearing out. Like you don't give what's easy, you give more than that. And so it becomes difficult, and that's probably when you are actually giving. Yeah, so I guess that's another way of giving something up with it. Cami, any thoughts on that?
I like what everyone's saying. I was just thinking about like public schooling and how like I'm kind of removed from that, but like I think I should probably get more involved in ways that like lots of people like just wanting to make the options available better for everybody, because I'm really privileged to be able to just homeschool my kids, but I should use some of that like those resources to make like the other options better somehow.
Yeah.
Like just on my mind, I haven't really thought it out all the way.
Yeah, it's kind of like in some ways as well, like the privilege of choosing a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought about that before, because I remember having discussions about this of we don't necessarily like, what is it about a neighborhood full of white people that doesn't spring in our minds like we should disqualify that neighborhood? Why is it not more important? Why is it not a deal breaker for us that there's a complete lack of diversity here? And I thought that was a really interesting thing. Like, would we be willing to give up that idea of not like giving up completely the idea of like choice in where we move, but just being like, well, that's not an option, because in order to make a change, I have to go somewhere to a neighborhood where like I'm not just like saying like, oh well, I don't want to be part of that or any of those things. Charlotte's asking, how white is my neighborhood? You know what, honestly, I don't know that much, except our neighbors that way are Hispanic, but other than that, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
I know when like we moved into our place, it's just a lot of, you know, these mid-sized houses, but then a couple years later they put in a lot of like apartments.
Yeah.
And I know that's not entirely like race thing, but it's like the lower income housing type thing, you know. And the amount of people, like, I mean, I was sad because it like blocked my view of the mountains or whatever, but the people were just like, oh, what is this going to do to the, you know, the ward, to the neighborhood? And I was like,
the low income people are coming.
Move out. Honestly, everyone has moved out, but I don't know if that was really why, but yeah, it's just like crazy to think about that. It's like you put in apartments and suddenly everyone's like, oh, the neighborhood.
Neighborhood's gone. I remember when we lived, Emily, in your neighborhood. It's
Yeah.
zoned for Mary May.
Yeah.
And this was before my kids were in school, but I was kind of like, how there's a school, like how, whatever. I didn't know anything. And one person or couple, maybe two family or women that I talked to, they're like, it's just, there's a lot of low income kids. They're not very good. Not the kids, but like just the school's not very good, blah, blah, blah. And that was one of their points. It was like a lot of low income kids. And I was like, okay, that made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to say. And then I talked to someone else, same school, a couple years later, and she's like, I love it. My kid gets to hang out with lots of different kids. And she went to like a party and they're all speaking Spanish and blah, blah, blah. She made it such a positive thing. And I was like, wow, that is such a great way to look at it. And then just seeing my Hudson go to school now. He doesn't go to Mary May, but he goes to another school that's like, I don't know what it's called, but there's like half of the schools on assisted lunches. And so it's just it is more diverse socioeconomically and racially. And I love that his friends came from all different backgrounds and stuff. And I just remember appreciating that one perspective of that mom being like, I love having my girls go there because they get to meet different people and, that kind of a thing. And just, so it's just interesting, the different mindset and how you can go into a situation and giving up your comfort of if you're used to going to schools with high income people and white people or whatever. And how do your kids hear you talk about it like that,
Yeah, it's really interesting because often, like, the schools, like Mary May, like you talked about, like the school we're zoned for, is rated pretty low in terms of the school district. Like, it's just in terms of like a ranking of how well the school does, how well it performs. And so for a lot of people, like, in order to send your child to that school and to pick a house in that neighborhood, it is like you're giving up the fancy white school with the resources and the better whatever, like. Yeah. But again, like, it's always like, well, that's not really a loss.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of research that says parent involvement is a huge part of that. Yeah. So it's like your kid coming from your household, you're in control of that, I don't know. I just think that's like a secondary consideration, but that's just me.
Charlotte, just sharing, she she's curious about my neighborhood because we live close to her, but she's in the apartment complex and she said it's very diverse, like they're probably only white households in the building. And I was like, I'm not really sure because we don't know that many of our neighbors, but we didn't pick it for its diversity. Let's be honest here, like that wasn't on my radar at that point. Like, we're just cheap, so we bought somewhere that was less expensive. But I mean, obviously there's a lot of renting, so I think of neighborhood that I guess they might have diversity, many credit for that.
I have another one, unless we have more of this topic.
No, go ahead.
So this one's been a really tough one for me to grapple with, but I think one thing that if we really are dedicated to trying to help this, we are going to somewhat give up peace and popularity. Obviously, Emily, like I've talked with you about this extensively. I really, really struggled with this one. Like, there's so many times where I've like, Emily, we can't do it that way. But I don't know, I've just been like soul searching it, and I think you're right. Like, there's no way we can do this without hurting white people's feelings, and it's really hard for me. Like, the thought of hurting friends and losing friends, and because it's happening. But I don't know. I don't think there's any way we can make change without making people feel uncomfortable. And when people feel uncomfortable, like the defenses come up, and it's a really rough one. But I think that might be part of the.
Probably that should have been our first one. That's probably one of the biggest ones, honestly. Like, I think about that term, white solidarity. Like, we have to give up this notion of this white solidarity, this agreement that we all have as white people to just not look at this too closely, to not make each other uncomfortable, to not call this kind of stuff. Like it's literally like almost like against our societal code, like our code of politeness, of nicety, of just like, it throws people off when you bring stuff up, and
And
it's
it really truly caused a lot of very bad feelings. And I like, in an ideal world, we could do this very nicely and just, you know, let's have a nice conversation about this, but it's not an ideal world. And like you were saying, like before, sorry, Alice is like screeching loud again. Like disinformation spreads